Welcome to Lesson 5, Painting and Retouching. In this lesson, you'll get a quick primer in color and color models. You'll also have an opportunity to practice using Photoshop's painting and retouching tools. I have opened the image named PS0501, which you also have in your PS05 Lessons folder. The reason I have this image open is because it's extremely colorful. And being extremely colorful is okay in some cases, but not when you're going to print an image. Now, when I work with professionals who end up printing images, they are sometimes disappointed in the results because they're not seeing the same vibrant colors. There's a couple reasons for this. One is that their settings are incorrect in Photoshop. The other is there are some colors that you're just not going to achieve when you go to press. Now, whether you create graphics that are just for on-screen or for print, you do want to understand the different color models and how they can affect your image. The first thing I want to explain are the color settings. And you'll see I'm selecting Edit Color Settings. And in here, as a default, Photoshop is set up as North American General Purpose 2, which means that Photoshop has no clue where this image is going to be used. Is it on the internet? Is it in an app? Is it in a printed piece? You can help Photoshop to give you better results by selecting where this might end up. If you're doing web or internet or app creation, select the on-screen option that is called Web Internet. If you're doing print, which I'm going to use this as my example, choose North American Pre-Press 2. Now, if you work with somebody who really understands your press settings, you can, of course, come in here and customize your settings even further. For dot gain or total ink limit, all those options are available to you by selecting CMYK and then selecting Custom CMYK. You'll see this is also where you can control whether you get those missing profile dialog boxes when you open up a file or not. Now, when I select North American Pre-Press, what does it do? It actually tries to change the preview and how it appears to me in Photoshop, but it also changes many other settings, like my highlight settings and shadow settings, and even what colors I can achieve when I'm picking a color in the color picker. So for instance, when I click OK, you'll notice that when I go to the color picker, I can choose a color. And what I want to explain is that when you first look at this color picker, many people don't understand this. This is a big circular color space over here. And as a default, when you have black selected, you're smack in the middle of that space. And when you start changing the color, you're spinning that wheel around, but you're still smack in the middle because it extends all the way around like this. So if you want a color, you need to come out of those really desaturated dark colors into the edge of the color space where you can actually change the hue. And this is how it works. This is your hue slider, and this is how you choose a color. You can also adjust the saturation, and you'll notice that as I come down here, things are becoming less colorful, desaturated. I can even control the lightness and darkness. And you'll see over here, hue, S for saturation, and B for brightness. Now I happen to be in RGB mode, which is fine, and I recommend that you stay in that mode whether you're doing on-screen graphics or print graphics, and not changing it to the very end to CMYK if you have to. Even though I'm in RGB, I can still enter values in any format over here. I can enter CMYK values, lab colors, HSB colors, and RGB colors. Now, what I wanted to explain about this color picker is that as you go out towards the edge of that color space, you're probably going to discover that some of those colors can't be achieved in print. And you'll see an alert appears, looks like a little exclamation point. It's giving me a warning saying, hey, really great color, but that's never going to print. And when I click on that warning, it will pull me back into a less saturated color that is producible based upon the settings that I have in color settings. In other words, if I have web or internet selected, I might be able to get some more bright colors because it's for on-screen only. Now, if you're really worried about the 216 colors that are web safe, which really has become a non-issue at this point unless you're dealing with very, very old systems, you can click on the cube to select a web safe color. And you can see the hexadecimal value appears down at the bottom of the color picker. What you can also do is select from View, Gamut Warning. And you'll see here that the gamut warning turns on, indicating where, based upon your color settings, you might have problems selecting colors or might not achieve the results that you expect. I'm going to turn off that gamut warning, and I'm just going to click OK. Now, what I see a lot of people do who work in the print industry is open up an image and immediately select Image Mode CMYK. And the reason they do that is because of the change that's reflected in the image, and they actually want to see how bad it's going to look when it's in CMYK. Well, the problem with that is that you limit yourself on your retouching tools and also on the curve adjustments that you can make by immediately turning this into a CMYK image. So what you should do instead is go over to View and select Proof Colors. You can use Command or Control Y to do this. And what this does is it puts a CMYK at the end, and it's indicating to me that this image is indeed in RGB mode, but I'm giving you a preview of how it's going to look in CMYK. And you can toggle that off and on by pressing that Command or Control Y. So I'm on the PC, so I'm pressing Control Y, but on the Mac, you would press Command Y. So I'll leave that on for right now. Now, if you want to work throughout the cloud with all of your applications set to the same color setting, simply go into Bridge, and I'm selecting File, Browse, and Bridge, and you'll notice that I can go under Edit to Color Settings, and I can choose North American Prepress or Web or Internet, or whichever one I want to use. And you'll see that when you go back to your other applications, you're also set for North American Prepress too, and that you're synchronized. I'm going to close this file and just open up a new blank file for just a moment. And I'll use default Photoshop size, which is fine. Now, how do you apply your colors? I've got the color panel, and I also have the swatches panel. And you'll notice that you have foreground and background right in the color panel. And that you can take your paintbrush, and of course you can paint any color you want. I'm pressing the right bracket to make my brush size a little bit larger so you can see a little better. If I hit X, I can switch easily to the background color. I can swap their position. You can also see that in the color panel, you can determine your color by clicking on the panel menu, and you see that you can choose HSB, CMYK, even grayscale color right from here. Now, I have this at RGB, and I want you to notice that as I drag a particular color, I'm also getting those warnings that I got in the color picker. I can also hold down my Shift key and click on this color ramp so I can quickly go to the different color ramps as well. So if I want to select grayscale, for instance, it makes it really easy. I have my swatches panel that comes in with default colors. If you don't want these default colors, you can go to the panel menu and you can replace them with swatches of your own, or you can select Pantone solid coated or some other colors that you want to use. Now, understand when you select something like Pantone solid coated, you're not really getting Pantone colors at this point. This is going to create the process version of those Pantone solid coated colors. There is a way that you can use Pantone colors in Photoshop, but it involves using channels and not just using a regular swatch. Now, if you are replacing swatches or you want to add swatches, when you select a different library of swatches, you receive this message. If you click on OK, all your present swatches will be replaced with the new library that you selected. If you click Append, you'll just add them to the bottom of the list. I'm going to go ahead and close this file. I'm selecting Browse and Bridge, and I'm going to open up a couple other images. So I'm selecting PS0504, and then I'm also holding down my Control key and selecting PS0503. I want to use the same color of hair in the other image. Notice that if I have a painting tool selected, I can hold down my Option key and I can Option click, and it adds the color to my foreground color. If I want to save that for later use, I can click on New Swatch. I can call it Hair and click OK, and it's added at the end. Now your swatches are application wide, which means if I close this file, I still have access to that same swatch in this other file. If I take the paintbrush and I select that brown, you'll notice that when I paint, the default is that it's coming in as a gray blob. Now that's because this image is in the grayscale mode, and that's all it knows how to produce. I'm going to press Ctrl-Z or Command-Z if I'm on the Mac, and I'm going up to image mode and I'm selecting RGB color. Now, even though the image doesn't change because it's neutralized to be a grayscale image, I now have the ability to use color. Now, typically, if you're colorizing a grayscale image, you would make some adjustments to it. Like, for instance, changing the blending mode. Each one of these blending modes looks different depending upon the color you have selected and the underlying information. I'm going to select something that is used overall for colorizing images. It allows you to keep the grayscale or data underneath the image as you colorize it. And so you can see that I can still see the hair as I color the image. Now I'm going to undo that because you'll also see that I can change the opacity. I can either click and drag to set the opacity, or I can simply press 2, and that changes it to a 20% opacity to give me a nice little light feel to that color. I can choose any color I want. I don't have to sample it from a file. I can also come over here and sample a color for the skin. And you'll notice that as I'm painting, my brush is a certain size and it's represented in that cursor. If for any reason you see a cursor that looks like this, that means you're in the precision mode. You are still painting the same, but it gives you that mode so that you can see exactly in the intersection where you're painting. I prefer to see the cursor so that I can press the right bracket to make my brush bigger if I want, or left bracket to make it smaller. If I need a harder brush, maybe I'm going along the edges, or a softer brush, I can also control that with a keyboard as well. If I press Shift right bracket, my brush becomes harder. Now I'm going to intentionally select a dark color so you can see the difference, and I'm also going to pull the opacity up and put the color blending back to normal. There's a hard brush. Now if I undo that and I press Shift left bracket, you'll see a difference. Here's a soft brush. But of course, you don't typically color opaquely on an image unless you're creating some sort of graphic that requires that. Most of the time, you're selecting some kind of color mode. Color is probably one of the most popular. Multiply is as well. You'll see that that also gives you the effect of seeing through to the detail underneath, but it's more like a magic marker, and that's how it's expected to work. So maybe I take the blue and I change the opacity down a little bit, and I'll leave it with the multiply effect to colorize his eyes a bit. And when you change your opacity, you can actually build it up by clicking and painting continuously. So in this lesson, you learned a little bit about color, color modes, color settings, and painting and retouching. This has been Jennifer Smith for Digital Classroom.